so when you look at the Crusades, like you mentioned, a lot that's really coming from the church, which is kind of its own entity, and it just happens to be like people who may be involved with what we know as the Roman Empire at that time, but it's not. It's not like a pure Roman Empire play. It's more holy. And so it survives for like 1,000 years, and during this time, obviously, Christianity continues to become like a core center of the actual empire. And then in 1453, it fell to the Ottomans.
That's right.
Right. So what happened there?
Well, by then, the empire was a ghost of what it had been. It was terribly weakened, probably fatally weakened, in 1204 by the Fourth Crusade, when they took Constantinople and sacked it and tore the empire to pieces. So for about a half century, Crusaders ruled in Constantinople, and the Byzantine emperors were off in exile, in Nicaea, actually, and other parts. It was splintered in different fragments.
Crusaders ruled.
Crusaders, yeah, Westerners, French people, pretty much. French
like Templars?
There were some Templars there, but it was mostly French and Italian nobles and the Venetians who were ruling in Constantinople at that time. And they terribly mismanaged the empire very badly. And so when the Byzantine emperors finally came back, recaptured Constantinople, the state never really recovered. It had been terribly weakened by the ordeal. And the Ottomans, who were one of many of these kind of small Muslim potentates who rose on the fringes of the Byzantine world in the 13th century, just kind of found the state ready for the taking. It was only the fact that Constantinople was so impregnable, was so strong, that it lasted as long as it did. It could have fallen a century before. It was, by the time it fell, the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire, was just a few acres around Constantinople and some islands in the Aegean. It was a sad fragment of what it had been.
And at what point did the Vatican become its own thing and like separate off and become its own country?
Well, I mean, most recently, not until like under Mussolini, is when they finally established the Vatican as it is now. But before that, the papal states are kind of the origin of the Vatican, and that really comes in, I guess you could say, I don't know, like the 9th or 10th century. So after, to cut a long story short, so after Rome falls in the West, there are various Germanic kings who rule all the Western Empire. One of these kings, the greatest of them probably, is Theodoric, the Ostrogoth, who kind of establishes close relationships with the Byzantine Empire. But after his reign, the East comes back, Justinian comes back to conquer Italy and make it part of the Eastern Empire. And it works incredibly. He has a general called Belisarius, who's very effective, comes in, reconquers everything. But Italy won't stay conquered. There are new waves of barbarians, new Ostrogoths, new Lombards. Italy becomes a battleground. And so for most of the early Middle Ages, Italy is a few enclaves, including Rome, controlled from the east, from Constantinople. And other, mostly Lombard, Germanic principalities, dukedoms scattered across the peninsula. It's a mess. And this continues for a few centuries until the time of Charlemagne. Charlemagne's father, Pepin the Short, wasn't that short apparently, but anyway, he gives the Pope his protection, as does Charlemagne, who was then crowned the first Holy Roman Emperor in the year 800. And it's under the protection of Charlemagne's successors. The popes really get a lot of temporal power, power over the area around Rome. But even before that, they kind of filled the power vacuum left by the decline of Byzantine power in Italy. So long story short, early Middle Ages is when all that kind of comes together. And, popes get more and more power later on.
Right. And so when you look at the Crusades, like you mentioned, a lot that's really coming from the church, which is kind of its own entity. And it just happens to be like people who may be involved with what we know as the Roman Empire at that time, but it's not like a pure Roman Empire play. It's more holy.
Yeah, the Holy Roman Empire is it's nothing really to do. There's a famous joke by Voltaire, the philosopher, that it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, and it's pretty much true. It's
That's a good one.
It's kind of more a name and a concept than a state for a lot of its existence.
So like when the Germanic tribes conquered the West, that would be, we're calling that pretty much anything west of Italy at that point. So like France,
Spain, Britain, Italy, North Africa.
And then at some point, France and Britain and Spain in the years after that, like become their own entities and are no longer ruled by Germanic tribes.
Well, the Germanic tribes become part of the elite of those countries. Like in
Mm.
England, famously, England suffers the worst of the whole empire during the collapse. Only in England, initially anyway, is Latin forgotten. That's why we speak a Germanic language, right? These German tribes, Angles and the Saxons come in, wipe out the Romano-British aristocracy, and establish their own rule there, which eventually becomes the Kingdom of England.
Mm.
But elsewhere, it's less traumatic. So, like in Gaul, in France, and in Spain, it's more of a gradual power transition where the old elites, the old Roman elites, kind of intermarry with the Germanic people who had been coming in and create a new ruling class that still speaks some version of Latin, what would become Spanish and eventually French, but within this kind of new context.
And then many of them adapt Christianity, obviously, as their religion, which then ties back to Rome itself with the church being set up there.
Yeah, and many of the barbarians were actually Christians already when they came in. Actually,
Oh,
most of them
really?
were. Yeah, yeah. Some of them weren't. The ones to the farther north and east. But
Wow,
like
it's spread
the
that
Goths
far.
were all Christian already when they came in. But they were
Whoa.
heretics. They were Arians. And so
What do you mean?
so it's kind of a splitting hairs thing, but there was a lot of these disputes over the nature of the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit in Christianity in these early years. And especially over whether Jesus himself was divine, was holy God. And to us, it seems like just total semantics, but it became a really heated thing. And the Arians kind of in some ways denied the divinity. They had quibbles with the divinity of Christ, whether he was both man and
Oh.
God. Where the Orthodox position, the one that's held by both like Catholics and the Orthodox Church today, is that Jesus is both fully God and fully man somehow. So it's more about that balance of natures in him.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So
But
anyway,
they still considered themselves Christian,
yeah,
even if
they
didn't.
did. They thought they were the right Christians too. They thought
Yeah.
everyone else was a heretic, as heretics tend
That's how
to.
it goes with religion.
Exactly right. So there was a lot of friction between the Orthodox Christians, we would call Catholics today, and these Arian barbarians coming in.
Well, what do you think are the biggest lessons related to today that we should take heed of from the Roman Empire? Being in the middle of, this great experiment and empire that like America has become.
People ask me, is America Rome? And my reflex is no, of course not. It's all so different. And that's true on kind of a basic level that, a modern nation state like America is so profoundly different than a pre-modern empire like Rome. It's, as I said before, a modern nation both gives and takes much more than an ancient empire did. We have a different kind of tie to our country than the Romans ever did to their empire. We live in a different world. We have technology the Romans couldn't dream of, et cetera, et cetera. And the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century is so profoundly different from anything we're experiencing in the 21st century. It can't really be held up as a comparison. What you can learn something from, I think, is the collapse of Rome's Republic, in the days of Caesar and Augustus, where individual ambition undermined the whole system in which they lived. The greed of politicians and the blindness of politicians destroyed their world. And so if you want to look for lessons in the past, and you should with caution, I look for them there.
Great answer, man. We've been talking for like 5.5 hours today.
Wow.
You're a fountain of knowledge. It's
Oh, well, thank you.
extremely entertaining and also so much to learn from. And in light of like that last question right there, so many different patterns to point to as well. And you're right, you got to do it with caution and not overdraw things for sure. But your channel's amazing. Your podcast is great. We're going to have
you.
the links in the description. This was an awesome conversation. It was 2 episodes. We're definitely going to have you back for sure. But I really appreciate you coming out here and doing this. I had a great time. I know Alessi was pretty pumped with everything we were getting as well.
Well, Julian, thanks so much.
Absolutely, brother. All right, we'll do it again.
Awesome.
Thank you. Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.